Okay. Hi guys. It's been a minute. Well, I guess not. I did record the Grease bonus for last week, but you know, it's been a minute since we've done true crime, since we did part 1 of Candy Mossler, which I feel like everyone must have forgotten about completely by now, but I don't want to leave it just unfinished because I do love the story. So I am finishing it today. And I have tried to record this several times and then never made it through the whole thing. And then I kind of, I like to have continuity. So I want to record the whole thing at once. So we're going to try. Henry, my other dog that I talk probably the least amount about, I noticed over the weekend, he has a tooth that must have gotten hooked either on Indiana's collar when they were playing or broke it on a toy, something. And his bottom front tooth has been pulled all the way straight down and is like jutting out the front of his mouth. Took him to the emergency vet this weekend. They couldn't do anything. So thankfully, I have a vet appointment for him in about 90 minutes. So we'll see if I can get this whole thing completed. Um, no sense of place or intro, but I will recap kind of at least what we did in part 1 of the Candy Mossler story. So let me read my little teaser overview and maybe that'll spark some of your memories. Um, so step into the glamorous world of Candy Mossler, a high society Houston socialite whose life took a dark turn when she became entangled in a forbidden romance. In this episode, we unravel the layers of intrigue surrounding Candy's luxurious lifestyle, the steamy affair that captivated Houston's elite, and the shocking night that would forever change her life. So, um, if you recall, or if you don't, I'm going to tell you. Uh, Basically, Candy Mossler grew up very poor. This story takes place in the 60s ish, 50s and 60s. And the story really begins when she meets um, the victim in our story, Jacques Mossler. He was 20 years her senior, very, very wealthy, worth around 30 million when they met and started dating. Um, and they got married. He built her a huge mansion in River Oaks area of Houston. And she had kids from her previous marriage. And then remember, Jacques went to Chicago on business and learned about these 4 orphans. Candy flew out, adopted them, flew them back. So now they have all these kids together. And they were supposedly great parents and turned like the whole kind of lavish dining area or ballroom into like a kid's playroom. They Candy and Jacques as a couple, lived the high life in Houston. Um, and then we learned last time about Melvin Lane Powers, who was Candy's nephew, her sister's son. Um, and I know that nephew means one of your siblings' sons, but it could be nephew through marriage. And this was not, this was nephew through blood. And in the summer of 1963, they had been carrying on an affair together for quite some time. Candy and Jacques were having problems, and Jacques was traveling a lot, spending a lot of time in Miami. Candy and her nephew, who was, I believe, 20 years her junior, started a romance together that was ongoing. Jacques eventually found out about it through, they had a huge staff at the mansion. And so the staff would talk, and Jacques caught wind of it. Um, he he then had that confirmed by finding and reading her diary. So he wanted to divorce her, and he wanted to actually sue her nephew for ruining his marriage. But if he did either of those things, it would ruin his reputation. Um, and if he was the one who filed for divorce, Candy would get half of everything. Whereas if she was the one who filed for divorce, she only got $200,000, which is still a lot of money, especially back then. But, he doesn't want to get, that's a lot less than giving away half of his $33 million estate, which would be worth about $300 million today. So they decide, instead to officially get divorced, they decide to separate. Candy was going to stay at the mansion in Houston. Jacques went to his condo in Key Biscayne, Florida. He gave her $5,700 a month to kind of maintain the house, take care of the kids. Um, and now that Jacques was gone, Candy and Melvin could kind of carry on freely with their love affair, and they did. But at the end of June 1964, school was out. Candy took the kids to visit Jacques in Key Biscayne. They were going to stay for a week. And one night, Candy at 1 a.m. woke the kids and said, "Come with me. We have to run some errands. I have to mail some letters. And I also, I need to go by the hospital," because she had migraines. She did suffer from really bad migraines. So at like 1 o'clock in the morning, she wakes up all her kids, loads them into the car. They go out and run errands. They go get burgers at a diner. And she goes to the hospital to have some type of treatment for her migraine. Around 4:30 in the morning, they head back to the condo. And to their horror, when they walk in, they find Jacques covered in blood, lying in a pool of blood on the floor, motionless. It turned out that he had been stabbed 39 times in and around his heart and lungs before being bludgeoned with a blunt object, which I think they believe it was like a big glass decorative swan that was there. So that's kind of where we left off. Talking about that he had been murdered, and that based on, I mean, cops, I'm assuming, are anxious to solve any and all murders, but based on the elite kind of status and prominence of the Mosslers, this was like they needed to figure this out and do it fast. So just also to kind of recalibrate where we were. I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, but at the time that all this was occurring, Jacques was in his late 60s. Candy was just barely 50, and Mel was about 28 years old. And the murder occurred on June 29th, 1964. So that's where we are right now. So the police did find what they believed or hoped would be the murderer's fingerprints at the scene. But CSI type things weren't as quick back then as they are now. So it was going to take several days to process the fingerprints and then try to link them to someone. So during this time, law enforcement was really trying to avoid any of this information getting leaked out to the media. I mean, there was a media storm around this very rich, prominent couple. Their whole story is very fascinating. And then throw in the kind of love affair, which I don't think at this point was like public knowledge, but there were whispers and rumors. So the press was all over this, and it was really difficult for law enforcement to kind of keep any and everything that they were discovering out of the press. A notable socialite, a prominent businessman, and her nephew lover. Like, it's the perfect story. They weren't able to keep it out of the press for too long. Tons of media outlets and newspapers wanted to kind of break the story. The Houston Chronicle had a headline that said, "Houston millionaire stabbed to death." Miami News said, "Millionaire banker slain on Key Biscayne," and there were plenty of others. So media coverage is pretty quickly blowing up. Police are scrambling to try and piece together any ideas or theories on what might have happened that night. While police are doing this, Candy is preparing for Jacques' funeral. It happened pretty quickly. So it was the 29th that he was murdered. Funeral took place on July 3rd in Miami. Candy and the kids were seated front and center, with Candy weeping quietly and really doing a great job of fulfilling the role of kind of grieving widow and mother. There were definitely some naysayers, though. There were people who wondered if her kind of display of grief was 100% sincere, especially because Jacques and Candy were separated. Now, that's not to say that if you separate from your partner, you wouldn't be devastated if they died, but Candy had seemingly been very happy without Jacques and was madly in love with somebody else. After the funeral, Jacques was flown to DC, where he was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. So, as this investigation got very quickly underway, police were, of course, anxious to interview the grieving widow. Generally, you always look to the spouse. Now that I know that's more common when it's a woman who's murdered, you look to their male spouse. But nonetheless, they were still anxious to talk to Candy. So once Candy was speaking with investigators, she told them that she noticed Jacques' wallet, a stack of $100 bills from the bathroom. What just happened? My Zoom just did something weird. I don't know. So once Candy was speaking to investigators, one of the first things she explained to them was that she noticed Jacques' wallet was gone, a stack of $100 bills from the bathroom counter were gone, and her gold and diamond wristwatch was also missing. So her theory that she floated was this was a burglary gone wrong. She also told investigators that her husband had, accumulated a good amount of adversaries over the years, ranging from rival bankers, angry former employees or disgruntled customers. He ran basically a lot of his business was like a repo business. He was repossessing people's vehicles, appliances, all kinds of stuff, in addition to plenty of other businesses and endeavors that he had. But that one in particular, or those, those upset people. You're taking their car, their appliances, their homes. And law enforcement didn't disagree with Candy that this could be the case. So they kind of dove into his business connections, and she was right. He had a ton of enemies. His company had seized thousands of vehicles and appliances and initiated mortgage foreclosures. And he operated as a meticulous and kind of principled businessman, but he had no empathy or sympathy or kindness to the people who he was repossessing things from. So he wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong or unfair or illegal, certainly in these instances, but he showed no remorse, and that angered and upset people even more. But police couldn't find anything there. There was really nothing. Yes, he had a lot of enemies and people who were angry, but nothing that made sense for this murder. What they really believed is that this was a crime of passion because he was stabbed 39 times before being bludgeoned. And so they told, Candy, this wasn't just a murder. This was like a slaying. This was not an execution, but I mean, this was passionate and angry. And that often suggests, an emotional or sexual or romantic tie between the assailant and the victim, or familial. So everyone's, of course, going to look at Candy after the police come out with this. And once the police told her this, she really quickly kind of rewound her story from the burglary or the pissed off employees or customers. And she said that she actually had heard a lot of rumors that suggested that while Jacques was staying in or visiting Florida over the recent years, he would often invite young men that he had met on the beach up to his apartment. And she said that, and what she was insinuating was for sex. So that was not very eloquently put. But she also told police that when her and the kids were that week on Key Biscayne, her husband received multiple calls from a man that she described as having feminine tones while still being a man. And so now Candy, she's retracted from the burglary or the disgruntled employee customer thing. And now she is telling police, due to my late husband's secretive life, it's a real possibility that one of these alleged lovers murdered him because he was either tired of being kind of kept in the closet, the relationship having to be quiet, or the fact that Jacques had multiple lovers. And this seemed feasible, possible to police. They weren't going to rule it out. But when they discovered that Jacques wasn't the only one leading a secretive life, her theory of a lover turned murderer kind of began to fade into the background. Because while there were rumors around Houston about Candy and her nephew and their kind of torrid love affair, horrid love affair, uh, there was no concrete evidence of this. Investigators didn't have anything or necessarily even know about these rumors. But when they did find out about this almost 2-year romantic relationship that Candy had had with her nephew, um, I was trying to think of the word blood relative nephew, um, and that they discovered all the passionate love letters between the two of them, um, witness accounts of trying to be discreet but not really doing that, rendezvous at various locations, of course, the family mansion, but also the ranch that the family owned and the beach house in Galveston. Um, so this newfound kind of information for investigators compelled them to reassess Candy and Melvin. There was a huge shadow of suspicion upon them now. They, initially appeared as grieving family members. Now they were potential suspects, and the investigators wanted to re-examine their roles in all of this. They still also were not going to rule out all the other theories. So maybe it was still a burglary gone wrong. Maybe it was a disgruntled employee or former client, or maybe it was one of Jacques' alleged male lovers. Or maybe it was his own wife. And that was kind of what many of the investigators felt was the most plausible here. There wasn't anything at this point. They didn't have the fingerprints back yet. They didn't know, whose blood was where. They didn't have all the witness accounts. So at this point, we're just a couple days in. It seemed reasonable, but there was nothing concrete. And then they discovered Jacques' diary. He also kept a diary, and he had written multiple times about how he feared for his life. He documented that he believed Candy and Melvin wanted to kill him for his money. And he actually wrote, quote, "If Mel and Candace don't kill me first, I'll have to kill them." Seems like maybe they did kill him first. And then over the next few days, in addition to the diary and just kind of the suspicions of these two possibly being behind this, some really damning evidence came to light. Turned out that Mel was in Miami the night of the murder. His fingerprints were found in Jacques' apartment where Candy and the kids were staying. They were also found in a car that was similar to one allegedly seen driving away from the condo that night. A witness neighbor saw a white Chevrolet spotted at the murder scene and driving away that night. And Candy had rented Melvin a white Chevrolet to drive while he was in Miami. Police found that car at the Miami airport, where it had apparently been parked at 5:19 a.m. on June 29th, just several hours after Jacques' murder, and right before Melvin boarded a flight back to Houston.